You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 26.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing great. Last week, I spoke with Jean-François Rivet, violinist, conductor, and professor who was my teacher and mentor for 11 years and had a definitive influence on who I am as an artist today. Jean-François and I had an amazing conversation about learning to listen to ourselves, paying attention, nurturing our imagination, live passionately, and broadening our horizons as humans and musicians. It was an incredibly inspiring and meaningful conversation, and I hope you had a chance to listen to it. I'm really happy to continue this series on the pedagogues that shaped me as a violinist with a discussion about another giant in my musical journey, Zvi Zeitlin. Professor Zeitlin was a faculty member at the Eastman School of Music from 1967 to 2012, and he was revered for decades as a violinist, pedagogue, chamber musician, and champion of contemporary music. Unfortunately, Professor Zeitlin passed away in 2012, but I had a wonderful time talking about him with Michael Klotz, violist with the Amernet Quartet and senior instructor at Florida International University in Miami. Michael and I were colleagues in the Zeitlin studio at both Eastman and at the Music Academy of the West. After graduating from Eastman, Michael became one of the few individuals to be awarded a double master's degree in violin and viola from the Juilliard School, and he was the recipient of the Tokyo Foundation and Gluck Fellowships while he attended the school. In addition to his activities with the Amernet and his teaching responsibilities, Michael performs regularly with many of today's most esteemed artists, from James Ennis to Augustin Heidelich, Vadim Gluzman, and Andres Diaz, and he serves as a faculty member at the Heifetz Institute and is a viola coach with the New World Symphony. In this episode, Michael and I discuss our experience studying with Mr. Zeitlin and his lasting influence on our lives. As time passes, I'm constantly reminded that a teacher stays with you beyond the years you spend studying with him or her. The knowledge that they pass down to us grows and deepens, and it really becomes part of who we are. We then pass that knowledge to our students, continuing the legacy and the musical traditions. My years with Zvi were awesome and a bit scary at times too. But I learned so much from him then, and I still keep learning from him every day by continuing to think about the things he said and to explore even further these principles that he would talk about in our lessons. Zvi was full of wisdom and knowledge and such an incredible, wonderful artist and violinist. It was a true pleasure for me to talk with Michael, and I think you'll enjoy our chat. Let's go to the show. Michael Klotz, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Michael, I remember vividly meeting you for the first time many years ago at Music Academy of the West, and you and I have shared many great memories throughout the years at Music Academy, like I just said, and also Eastman and New York String Seminar. And we had the privilege to share one more thing, and that's the chance to study with a truly incredible musician and artist, Zvi Zeitlin. And I've been looking forward to this opportunity to talk about him with you for a long time. So it's truly a treat for me to get to hang out with you a little bit today and talk about Zvi and about your career.
For me also, yeah. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Michael, I've talked about some of your accomplishments in the intro, but I would love for my listeners to get a better picture of your musical journey and have a chance to get to know you better. So can you please tell us about you and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I was born in Rochester, New York, and I began playing the violin at the age of 7. My mother was a violinist and a teacher. So I think that she kind of initially started me. And I learned how to read music, in fact, before I played the violin, which I think was a good thing. And then I began studying at Eastman, at the Eastman School of Music, probably when I was before the age of 8. And I like to joke, that's not really a joke, that I studied at Eastman from the age of 8 until 22. Because I was studying in the Eastman, I think it was called the Eastman Community Education Division, which was like Eastman Pre-College. And I studied with a lady named Anastasia Gempelis, who was a wonderful person and teacher, very dedicated. She was known as a Suzuki pioneer. She actually went to Japan and met Dr. Suzuki and was one of the first people to bring the Suzuki method to the United States and teach it. And then at some point in high school, I began studying with the late Lynn Blakesley, who was a professor of violin at Eastman. That was really a wonderful experience. She had studied at Curtis and then in Europe and had lived in Europe and worked as a soloist and chamber musician and teacher for probably about 25 years before she came to Eastman. And then my senior year of high school, I had the opportunity to begin studying with Zvi Zeitlin, who I think you agree with me was for both of us, probably a very influential mentor. And for me, probably the most influential teacher and mentor that I ever had. While I was at Eastman, I probably shouldn't say this, but I was able to convince the dean or the head academic administrator to let me start playing the viola and use that in place of class piano. Which kind of came back to haunt me later. I'll get to that. But so I began playing the viola my junior year at Eastman, but not very, very seriously, just kind of picking it up and loving the C string and transposing Paganini and Vietnam on the viola, like a true violist. And then my senior year of Eastman, I decided to take the viola more seriously, all still while studying with Mr. Zeitlin. And I decided that I would audition for Juilliard on both instruments and try to pursue a double master's degree. And I was accepted on both instruments. And then I studied at Juilliard. And I played both. And I really started to gravitate towards the viola. Kind of a big guy. And so the viola, I thought, suited me very well physically. And of course, I really fell in love with the sound. And the more chamber music I played, the more I really loved the viola. Then I was really privileged that I was quite active in New York while I was a student, playing in a number of terrific freelance orchestras, all while cutting class. And then in my second year of my master's degree, I decided that I wanted to look for a position of some sort, whether it was a teaching position, a quartet, or some other kind of chamber ensemble. There were a couple of orchestras that I was thinking to audition for. And I saw an advertisement for the Amernet string quartet. And at the time, they had an opening for first violin and viola, which is a little bit rare, for an established quartet to have two openings at once. But I had heard of the Amernet simply because they came to Eastman when I was an undergrad and played on the concert series there and had seen the name in other places. And so I decided to audition specifically with one of my closest friends and colleagues at Juilliard, Misha Wittensen, who was studying violin there also for his master's. So we contacted the members and said that we would like to be considered as a pair. And they came to New York and auditioned, a number of people. Actually, quite a number of my friends and colleagues from Juilliard applied and auditioned. And then Misha and I were invited to join the quartet. And we began playing with them while we were completing our masters. And then upon completion of masters, I moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where the Amernet Quartet had a residency at Northern Kentucky University, which is very close to Cincinnati. So I said, well, if I'm coming from New York, I got to at least keep it somewhat a big city. So I chose to live in Cincinnati, and I really loved it, and began my professional life. So at NKU, I had students. I was the viola teacher, a viola professor, and the quartet was in residence, and I learned very fast. I think you really start to learn on the job when you have a job, and You learn things that you don't learn in school. But it was a wonderful experience. Cincinnati is a fantastic city with a long-standing history of support for the arts, and in particular classical music, and specifically chamber music. The La Salle Quartet, one of the greatest quartets in history, they were based in Cincinnati. They taught at the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music. And it was really neat for me because when I moved there, I thought, especially with the viola, that I hadn't played for too long. I really only studied it formally for 2 years. So I thought there were still things that I wanted to learn. So I was very fortunate to have had a close relationship with Peter Kamnitzer, who was the violist of the La Salle Quartet and a fabulous musician, and also Henry Meyer, who was the second violinist of the quartet. And the Amernet would play quite often for both Henry Meyer and Peter Kamnitzer, and especially works that the La Salle Quartet was well known for, like the Schoenberg Second Quartet we learned under their direction, and of course late Beethoven and things like that. And in the second year that I was living in Cincinnati, a job came open for a quartet at Florida International University in Miami. And one of my best friends, Chauncey Patterson, who was the violist of the Miami String Quartet, and they were in residence at Florida International University, had told me that they were leaving. So there was an application, and the Amernet Quartet auditioned, and we were offered the position here in Miami in 2004. And so I was pretty excited because I had heard some really nice things about Miami and, seen a lot about South Beach on TV. So I said, well, I'm going to try to live there. That looks like fun. So one really neat thing that happened as a result of my association with Peter Kamnitzer is that he loaned me his 1619 Brothers Amati viola, which was really very special for me. It had been sitting in his closet. He hadn't played much in a while, but it was very, very nice that I had that opportunity. And so I moved to Miami with an Amati. And we began in earnest in 2004, and very exciting. And I've been there ever since. I've been here ever since, I should say, because I'm currently in Miami. And it's been quite a wonderful experience. And not only from the quartet standpoint, but the city of Miami is, I'd say, in the last 10 years undergoing a major cultural revolution. There's really a lot of incredible things happening here in all aspects, not just in music, but with art and architecture and dance. And the Miami City Ballet is one of the top companies of its kind. And of course, there's the New World Symphony here, the Arts Center, which brings in all the top orchestras of the world, many of the top, I should say. And the other thing, since I've been here, my career has sort of taken a number of different paths. The Amernet Quartet is still my principal. I'm still devoted to it principally as my main gig, I guess I could say. But I've been fortunate to, since I've lived in Miami, to have been invited to many prestigious festivals as a violist, both performing festivals, specifically chamber music, and also some of the premier teaching festivals. And I have had some really, really terrific students over the years, which started in Cincinnati, actually. Among my top students, of course, was Wesley Collins, who's currently the principal viola of the Cleveland Orchestra. And in Miami, I began working with a number of high school students in addition to my duties at the college. And it's just something that I really love. I really love teaching serious high school students that want to embark on a career in music. And been very, very lucky and had some extremely talented and serious students that have done quite well. Also, living in Miami, there are many kind of off the beaten path opportunities that have happened as a result of living here, and I feel that I'm very fortunate to lead a kind of a multifaceted career as a violist here, based in Miami. And of course, the quartet travels quite a bit, and with the Amernet, I've had the good fortune to travel to the Far East and throughout Europe and Latin America, and of course the United States. And we get to play with some very, very prestigious musicians, people that I've admired. And actually, I'd say it's been kind of a dream come true in that regard. There are people that we've been able to play with are people that I guess as a student I thought were unapproachable. And, when you're a student, you think, oh my gosh, such and such is just so famous and so amazing. And you admire them so much. And I still admire them, but it's in many cases nice that I feel fortunate that I've been able to share the stage with some very, very fabulous players and fabulous people, probably more importantly. And of course, I should mention that I'm married and I have 2 children. That also happened in Miami. And well, I'm not sure. I guess we're going to get into the balance of life between family and. But anyway, yeah. So that's who I am. I would say that I love the professional balance of teaching and performing, particularly with my quartet. The quartet repertoire is like no other, and still to this day inspires me, motivates me, and moves me.
Michael, that's a wonderful journey. And there's one thing that you said that I would like to send as a message to all the students out there, and it's really to know this, right? Learning never stops, and homeworks don't stop either. They just look different. And I think that students think they'll get less busy when they're done studying, but quite the opposite happens. You just mentioned balance, and I'm not sure that exists, but we'll see. Michael, I've been thinking a lot lately about the influence that those teachers and mentors have had in our lives. And I really am looking forward to talk about Zvi with you. And maybe we can touch on how this legacy continues through you. You mentioned some really fantastic successes from some of your students. So I look forward to talking about all of those things. Can we start with you telling us a little bit about Zvi? Who was he to you, and how was he as a teacher? What were the main ideologies and techniques that he used?
I'm actually tearing up a little bit. There's Zvi for me was and even remains, even after his passing, a constant source of inspiration. And of course, okay, so I'll back up. I first heard of Zvi when I was a kid. Growing up in Rochester, Zvi's a legend, and especially if you're a violinist. And Zvi was imposing, brilliant, deeply passionate, the highest standards. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of, I think, everything, not just the violin, but he spoke, I think, 7 languages or something, and he was incredibly well read and knew the Torah and the Bible inside out. He was just a brilliant, brilliant man. And you mentioned earlier about learning. He was constantly learning. Even at an advanced age, it was incredible for me to walk in and see the man sitting at the computer typing emails. Maybe a little bit slower than people of the of the millennial generation, but I fully believe that if Zvi were alive today, he'd be on Facebook and texting and all that kind of thing. So,
I believe it.
You know what I mean? So while he was, of course, very old school, and I think he was also somebody who strived for information and for learning and constantly improving. I mean, the man gave a recital at the age of 89, shortly before his 90th birthday, which was, unfortunately his last year of life. I didn't attend, but I watched the video, and it just amazing, to be at that age and play the way he did. And that takes, constant dedication and hard work. And that's what inspires me. His dedication to his students, although while we were there, it wasn't easy. I mean, people ask me, did you cry? Sure, I cried afterward, and I wanted to quit. He was very, very, very tough, unrelenting. And I guess if I could levy one criticism, he did tend to get a little too carried away, and sometimes it would get personal. And although I think deep down he really didn't mean it. And then he would, as fast as he would break you down, he would build you back up. So that was certainly to his credit. I think that So how do I, well, I keep a picture of him in my case and facing my students. I know it sounds kind of, but yeah, I have one picture in my case and it's of him. And of course, I've made sure to tell my students all about him and his teaching methods and my lessons. And they hear about him all the time. If somebody came in to Zvi's studio and didn't play the violin so well, boy, did he teach you how to play the violin. Whether you were, had a God-given talent, I mean, different levels of talent, obviously, as you know, entered our studio. But I think you'll agree with me that he was able to bring every single student to their maximum potential.
That's true.
Through his, I mean, I think that I went through the entire road 24 caprices with him. I probably lost years of my life in those lessons, but they were, I mean, I thank him for it. I mean, I wouldn't have the technique that I have if it weren't for that. His sense of rhythm that he instilled, sense of detail, not to take a piece of music and not play it. Like I remember studying the Mendelssohn Concerto with him. I think you also did. And I just, of course, we all played the Mendelssohn when we're kids, and we learned it a certain way, and we all listened to Isaac Stern and Perlman, and growing up. But really, the sense of taking a piece of music and learning it every single detail, all the right rhythms, all the right dynamics, all the right nuances, all the right bow strokes, in order to be able to play it. And so I feel that what I've tried to do with my students is help or instill that level of preparation, particularly when they have auditions. I mean, it's not, Zvi used to have a lot of time on his hands. He was not as busy. When we studied with him, he was at an advanced age and no longer concertizing extensively and no longer raising children. And, so there were weeks that I had 4 or 5 lessons. That was not easy. But, and when you're able to offer a student 4 or 5 lessons a week, you can get a lot of work done. So there is that challenge, but I feel that I really try. I try to be as detailed as I can, the way he was with me, in terms of how to use the bow, using the bow expressively. That was one of his principles. I mean, he said to me once, "Don't be a victim of your bow," and that's something that I say to my students. And through I remember really explicitly everything we worked on in the road, and that's something that I make a point of working on with my students, and as a result I feel that they for the most part develop very secure techniques. And also with Zvi, there were so many funny anecdotes. I'm sure you remember them too, but I remember one thing. He asked me a question once, and I think I answered something like, well, honestly, how we do that, right? Colloquially, say, well, honestly, he stops me and he says, I really can't stand when somebody starts an answer to a question with honestly. He said, because it implies to me that under normal circumstances, what you are telling me is a lie. And so, I mean, there were times, I'm sure you felt this too, like you couldn't win with the guy. I mean, no matter what you said, it was wrong. I remember once having a lesson, and I played the Dvorak violin concerto, and I played it beginning to end, all 3 movements, which I really don't think I did that often, because he was not someone to sit there and listen to you without saying anything. But I think that I had some kind of a competition or an audition or something, and he, for some reason, I just played all 3 movements straight through, and it was actually not bad. I mean, for me. And he stops, and afterward he says, "Okay, bravo, Michael, fine, good." And this piece is so beautiful, such beautiful melodies, and it's so nationalistic in a good way. And I think I said something like, yeah, I know. And then he stares at me and he says, "No, you don't know." And then it was just like he did a 180, and then for the next hour and a half just like berated me, so on everything I did wrong. And that's the thing. He was so perceptive, so perceptive. I mean, any little thing he picked up on and fixed and addressed, and I mean, you couldn't get anything. And so I will say that when I went to Juilliard for my master's, and I studied with great teachers and people whom I admire musically. But I guess maybe part of it was just kind of getting older and doing a master's. But I guess I never felt quite as prepared with a piece of music as when I studied with Zvi. And as a result, I have some violin students that I love teaching. And I really try to keep, because I don't perform on violin more than a couple times a year. But with the violin students that I have, I really try to keep their repertoire limited principally to the pieces that I studied with him, because I feel that I know them the best. And, I was fortunate to get through a number of important concertos with him, and most of the Bach and, some sonatas and stuff like that. So yeah, I feel that the best thing that I can do for these students is teach them the pieces that I studied with him. Not that I'm teaching them at the same level necessarily, but I think that, since I feel that I know them very well, I'm able to impart them better to my students.
I agree so much with you.
Yeah, I know. I mean, right? I mean, when you look, it either worked or it didn't with Zvi. You and I both know of many people who really quite gifted also, who studied with him, and they just couldn't take it. They just, or they said, well, what the hell do I need this in my life for? And so they went elsewhere, and that's fine. But I think those of us who really stuck it out and saw, that he really wanted his students to succeed. And that's the other thing. I mean, after I graduated, I maintained a very, very close relationship with him throughout the 2 years at Juilliard. And then I had him a number of times perform with my quartet. Actually, we did the Chausson concerto, for violin, piano, and quartet. And to this day, Misha and I, my colleague in the quartet, we still talk about it. I mean, it was really, really special how he played it. And both in Cincinnati and in Miami, we had him. And we had him once. We did a Mendelssohn octet. We had a string festival at our school at FIU. And we invited Shmuel Ashkenazi, another one of my mentors, Zvi, Toby Apple, who was my viola teacher at Juilliard, and Yehuda Hanani, who was one of our colleagues in Cincinnati. And we played the Mendelssohn octet. We put Zvi on third violin, age of like 82 or 83. And it was awesome. He was awesome. I mean, he was, it was really something. And for me, of course, very meaningful to collaborate with him in a work like that. And anyway, yeah, I miss him terribly. I think there's almost not a day when I don't think of him at some point.
One of the things that stays with me from working with Zvi was really that importance of being very thoughtful when practicing, just as you said. Yeah. And one of his favorite saying that I think about all the time is technique is conception. And that really helped me shape the way I approach music and the way I practice and how I teach today. And this mentality of never separating music from technique. And I'm sure it must have been mentioned to me before I met him and started working with him, but it really is in studying with him that I really started to get it.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Years after studying with him, I would sometimes email him and be like, Mr. Zeitlin, that thing you were talking about, I think I'm starting to understand, And, I was curious about your thoughts on that concept of teacher's legacy. I feel like it can easily swing one way or another too strongly, and finding the right amount it's really a balancing act. Like some students, they absorb fully without ever questioning, and that can create all sorts of problems, starting with the fact that, like, how do you grow as an artist and develop your own voice if you don't take ownership of your learning experience and just stay passive during your formative years? But other students are so closed up and unwilling to fully try and experiment with what their teacher recommends. So they don't commit to giving it their best shot. And there's also the growth is not maximized. And what I love about my experience with Zvi is that I feel like it's it's the gift that keeps on giving, like you said. And what I mean by that is that I took in and tried what he told me to do back then to the best of my ability at the time. And I never stopped questioning and exploring those concepts, or try to explore those concepts further, and making sure that I understood them fully and how they work for me. So how do you think students should receive and absorb their teacher's instruction? How does that work for you? How you absorb Zvi's teachings and your other student teachers, of course, and how do you see how that goes and through your students? And if you're a student, what would you tell a young musician? You walk in a lesson and get guidance from your teacher. What next?
I think it depends a lot on where the student, for me at least, it depends a lot. The kind of teaching that I'll impart depends on where they are technically. And I think that for me, what I've taken from Zvi more than anything is the very, very detailed technical work that he does, that he did with me, which, of course, always had in mind a musical result. I mean, it was never, technique for the sake of technique. But I feel that while I agree with him that technique is conception, and I also use that mantra in my teaching, I feel that some students in their formative years still need more specific technical assistance, which he did with me also. I mean, I came to him playing, not really understanding how to use my bow and what to do with my fingers and that kind of thing. So I feel like I spend a lot of time on that with students of all ages. Even some people, I'm fortunate that I get to work with some of the New World Symphony Fellows who are all terrific players and ready to embark on professional careers. But I find that sometimes when I'm coaching them before an audition, taking them back to the basics, of curved fingers and the right, hand position and doing certain things with the fingers on the bow to help articulation. That's all stuff that I learned from Zvi. Everything, all of that stuff. And I think that in terms of how to form an interpretation for a young kid, I guess I'm kind of jumping around here, but for a kid who's, 15 or 16, who's, quite inexperienced and that kind of thing, I advocate what Zvi did in my lessons. There were times he would play records of Huberman and Chrysler and even Izai that he had in his collection. And, I tell the students, don't copy this, but listen to this, I mean, if you're playing a Brahms sonata or something, the viola repertoire is not quite as sexy as the violin repertoire. But if you have like a Brahms sonata, of course, first and foremost, take the score. That's also something that I derive from Zvi. Don't just learn the viola part, learn the whole piece. And so I make them use the score in their practice and in the lessons. And then, listen to X, Y, and Z, and don't copy them, but consider what they're doing. I mean, for me growing up, listening to Perlman and Zuckerman and Stern really helped shape my approach and my interpretations. Not that I can play like them, but I think that that's very important. And I think that one thing that Zvi used to talk about was, elements of style. And, don't play Bach like you play Tchaikovsky. That's surprisingly something that I think takes kids a while to negotiate, to understand. And so I spend a lot of time talking about style, and I make them all do some, not dissertation, but I would say light research on all of the composers that they're playing. That's something else that Zvi insisted upon. If you're studying the Brahms concerto if one was studying the Brahms concerto with Zvi and you couldn't tell him something about any of the four symphonies or the three string quartets or some of the other significant works, boy, did he let you have it. So I think that one way that students will help, form their interpretations are through academic study in addition to their practice, kind of knowing significant works of the composers. And I consider listening academic as well. And nowadays with every kid seems to have an iPhone. So there's no excuse, to not be able to, quickly jump on Wikipedia. I don't know, maybe I'm not supposed to say that, or some other site or YouTube and find very significant and really legendary performances. I would have killed to have YouTube back in 1996 at Eastman. Oh my goodness. I mean, you had to go to the library. It was a pain in the neck, to go and listen to something. But we did it, if we had to, we did it. So I think that the wealth of information that's available nowadays to students and of course to us is incredibly helpful in helping a student shape their interpretation and approach to music.
That's so true. Long gone are the days of the listening lab, right?
I can't remember I shouldn't say this, but I can't remember the last time I was in a library.
Michael, you mentioned really wonderful successes by some of your students. And how do you guide them into maximizing results in the practice room and preparing for auditions or performances? You already mentioned spending time thinking about the elements of style. Of course, you want to work on the technique and really knowing the score, knowing the composer. How do you guide your students towards preparing for these performances and these auditions?
Well, I mean, for me, really, first and foremost is the technique. I don't know. I've become kind of obsessed with it, but not in a bad way. I really, I just do the best that I can to make sure that my students have control over every note that they're playing. They really develop a strong sense of intonation, and I'm probably little too picky on that sometimes. But I guess if you play out of tune, doesn't really sound very appealing, does it? But beyond that, I really talk a lot about my experience as a musician and my experience taking auditions and playing concerts. And one thing that I had to work very hard to overcome, and I'm open about this, is nerves. I did struggle with nerves as a student. And, I managed, and then, of course, I had some successes. But I wish that I had somebody really kind of break it down to me the way I do for my students when my student tells me that they feel nervous, And one thing that I disagree with Zvi, as much as I love him, is that, is to say that, well, nervousness is a lack of preparation. Well, no, it's not. Not completely. But so I think one thing that I am helpful with my students is we do spend a great deal of time over a period of time talking about nerves and how to deal with nerves and how to overcome and how to maximize every experience, whether it's an audition or a concert. And so I do think that I'd like to think that I've helped a number of talented students achieve their successes through that work and through sharing my experience. I think that when you, as a student or a young person, when you hear from somebody who, well, I hope my students admire me somewhat, but I guess when you hear from somebody that you admire, that they had this experience, and here's what they did, and here's how they've negotiated that, and how, here's how that became better for them, I can immediately see it. These students immediately are more at ease. And so I do think that my students are, in addition to being as technically prepared as I can make them, also very, very mentally prepared for their auditions and what to expect. And I go through every aspect of the audition. For example, the Juilliard audition is coming up, and I have 4 students who are auditioning for Juilliard this year for undergrad. And with each one of them, I've walked them through step by step what to expect. And then it's because I went there, although it was a little while ago. And again, it comes back from Zvi. Preparation. Preparation is the key. And in this case, we're talking about not just musical and technical preparation, but also mental preparation.
Mm-hmm. This is great. And, I know you have to be on your way soon, but just to take you back.
This is fun.
Just to take you back a little bit, because you mentioned how Zvi was so insistent on great technique, and you seem to be as well. And how do you approach sharpening this technique? How did Zvi do it, and how do you do it now? Do you take your students through scales, etudes? How does that look like?
So yes, definitely, scales. Although I do use scales, of course, and oftentimes students, at least my younger students, they need to be responsible for scales for some of their various auditions that they take here. But for me, I think the etudes like Kreutzer and Rode are very, very important. And I work in detail, and on the various technical aspects that these etudes address. The other thing is, well, I really admire Zuckerman. I don't know him very well. I've met him before, but I really admire how he plays and how he uses the bow. And I really have my students watch a lot of Zuckerman videos. And it seems almost very simplistic, but I said, try to copy that and watch his videos. There's a number of videos on YouTube where he talks about his approach to playing and his approach to using the bow. And he gets very detailed. And I try to do that. I think that, whether or not one is enamored of Zuckerman's playing, it's very hard to deny his prodigious gifts as a violinist and a violist.
He has such a fantastic bow arm. It's just tremendous. There's some really great master classes with him talking about bow technique out there.
Incredible, right? I mean, like I've watched those all, and again, I mean, it's somebody that I hope to get close with one day. But I have a couple of students who have studied with him also, and so I really admire. For me, there's different kinds of ways of using the bow, and I really admire the way he holds the bow. It's interesting. He had growing up in Israel, he studied with a lady named Ilona Fair, and I guess you could say that her three most famous students are Zuckerman, Shmuel Ashkenazi, and Shlomo Mintz. And Shmuel Ashkenazi is somebody who I'm very close with, and although I never studied the violin with him, I consider him a teacher and mentor, and somebody from whom I still learn. I'm fortunate that every summer I get to perform with him at a festival in Virginia. And gosh, it's a learning experience. And actually just watching him, how he uses the bow, how he holds the bow, how he uses the bow. And I guess it may sound silly, but I've tried to copy that. I think that I think that I have it somewhat figured out. So I teach my students from my experiences, is what I'm trying to say. I've been very fortunate to play with fabulous people, and I watch these things. I'm not sure I should be saying this, but I watch how I try to be as observant as I can of how people like. I'm just going to name drop here. James Ennis, Augustine Hadalick. These are, in my opinion, the greatest people on the concert stage these days. And having been able to play even just some chamber music things with them was so educational for me, not to mention inspiring. And I use those experiences in my own teaching, in addition to the detailed work that I did with Zvi in lessons.
Michael, I wish we could keep going for hours, and I hope we have a chance one day in person.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope I did okay.
Oh, you did amazing. How about a round of rapid fire questions?
All right. I'll try.
We've already talked about, life balance, and you told us a little bit about your career, but for people that, are thinking of a career that resemble yours, can you tell us a little bit about what your life looks like?
Okay. Well, I mean, it definitely ain't 9 to 5, but, yeah. Well, so generally speaking, I mean, I divide my time between teaching at FIU, rehearsing and performing with my quartet, teaching my some very gifted pre-college students, and also some of my other endeavors that I do. So I do keep pretty. Not to mention helping raise 2 little boys that are 5 and 7. So I keep pretty busy, and I think that if this is something that but it's doable. If somebody wants to do this, they just have to realize that they're not going to have a normal, very stable life, and things have to be planned sometimes at odd hours, and life's mundane tasks have to be, done when they need to be done. So you just have to sort of make time for that.
Yeah. What skills do you think musicians today should acquire in addition to learning to play their instruments?
I think that nowadays, you keep hearing about young musicians, people have to be their own entrepreneur. I think that's extremely true. I think that certainly playing proficiently and playing well and playing in tune are still the most important aspects. But beyond that, I think knowing how to talk to people, being presentable, being professional, having a website, an organized website, I do think Facebook is very important, although I guess Facebook is now more of an our generation kind of thing. My students are kind of like, yeah, Facebook's for old people. But I think that Facebook is important. I think Instagram, so social media is important. I think be careful what you post on Facebook. I'll just give you an idea, just without certainly being specific. I was asked about somebody to recommend for a festival, and I said that I think that they're a terrific player and a nice person, but just take a look at their Facebook, and I'm not going to say anything more. And you have to really watch out nowadays. I'm not saying that everything has to be all love and roses, but be careful what you post on Facebook, because it's become such an integral part of everyday life.
That's so true. Michael, is there a performance that has stayed with you throughout the years? And if so, why?
There are a number, but I guess in keeping with the theme of today's conversation, I'll never forget when Zvi played the Schubert Fantasy with Barry Snyder. Do you remember that?
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
I still think about it today. I think I can remember it very vividly. And I just don't think I've ever heard anything so beautiful and so touching. And actually, just real quick, when I was at Juilliard, I chanced to meet an old timer pianist named Leonid Hambro, and he was a very distinguished career. He played with Heifetz and Elman and Shumsky and all kinds of he was very close with a lot of leading violinists. I think he played for like the Bell Telephone Hour or one of those shows. But when I told him I studied with Zvi, he said to me, I played a Schubert Fantasy with him, and it was the greatest Schubert Fantasy I ever played with anybody. And he said, and that includes Heifetz and Milstein. So, that really meant something. So, yeah, I would say if I had to choose one performance that I heard that I'll never forget, it was that.
If I can throw in my own Schubert anecdote with Zvi, the summer after I graduated, he came and performed in Niagara-on-the-Lake for a ChamberMusic festival, and the ticket was $25. And at the time, that was a lot of money for me. I was just starting out as a professional, and so paying $25 for a ticket was, it was a lot of money. And I show up, I sit there, and he was playing the Schubert duo in this concert, and just after the first note, I turned to my friend who came with me, and I was like, that was worth $25 right there. The first note just, you just came and got me. And there's just something so celestial about that note that I was just, when you're in the presence of greatness. It was just amazing.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
Do you have a favorite tool in the practice room?
Probably my iPhone. No, I'm kidding.
For Facebook.
Yeah, probably I'm not a big metronome person or anything like that. I'm not saying that one shouldn't use the metronome, but I can't say that I do. I just kind of keep it too. Although I do use my phone because sometimes I have to look something up, and it's nice to have the phone there. So I would say, in all seriousness, my phone, because I have the information at my fingertips for something that I need.
It's like having the library in the room with you instead of having to go to it, right?
Precisely. Yeah. Precisely. Yeah.
Michael, do you have a favorite book that you would recommend to the listeners?
I have a lot of favorite books. Hard for me to say about a favorite book. I once read a book that I never forgot, called Tuesdays with Maury. It was written by Mitch Albom, and I actually have read that book several times. And this has nothing to do with music, although in a way it does. For me, basically a college professor was sick and on his, I don't even remember what the ailment was, but his student would visit him, and the book is about his visiting with him, and how much he learned about life and taking time to enjoy things. And so I think that for me, I think about that sometimes, that, when we get caught up in life's, little things, just take time and enjoy what you have. I have to sometimes do that, just take a split second and really enjoy the fact that we're alive and we have feelings and experiences and there's beauty around us and stuff like that.
That's a great book. What's an advice that was given to you that you would like to pass on to the listeners?
Patience. Be patient. I spent a lot of my, I was very impatient when I was younger, and it made things difficult. And it's hard, when you're a young person, and especially when you're a young musician, and you're ambitious, and you're talented, and there are a lot of people like that out there. But I would say I once, from a concert presenter that I'm friends with and very close with, who told me just, be patient, and that cream rises to the top. It doesn't. It happens if you're really gifted and serious and devoted. You will get there. No telling when, but you will get there.
Yes, I love that. I tell students sometimes that patience is the quickest way to get where you want to be. So
yeah. Oh, I like that. I'm going to start saying that. I'm stealing that from you.
Michael, do you have a quick actionable tip that the listeners could implement today in their musical lives? Or you should do it in the Zvi voice too.
Okay, ready? I told you, we were talking before. I said I was going to do a Zvi impression. Look, don't rush the rhythms. You have no rhythm, so develop some rhythm. Don't be fourth rate.
This is great. It's so true too, right?
Yeah, there's worse, but we'll leave that for another time.
Michael, do you have any final remarks you'd like to make before I let you go?
Yeah, I hope nobody hates me after this interview. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, really, it was really a pleasure. And I talk about Zvi all the time. I think that you talked about legacy. For me, it's really, really important to continue the legacy of such a great musician and pedagogue and professor. And so for me, the work that I'm doing, I hope, is in some way reflective of Zvi's legacy. And I think that history is important for all of us musicians. Being informed of why we are where we are, what brought us here. And to honor and respect traditions. Well, good traditions, because not all traditions are good. But I would say that that's important to know, know your history. No matter what instrument you play, know and respect and cherish good traditions.
I love that. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure. This was great.
Michael, I'm going to put information on the show notes on where to find you and about the Amernet Quartet. But what's coming up for you ahead in the next few months?
So in April, we a number of things that we do that I kind of annually. We always play the Haydn's 7 Last Words of Christ, my quartet, in a glorious Catholic church in Miami Beach. Really, really incredible, and the sound is just stunning in there. And so we'll do that 2 days before Good Friday, I guess during Holy Week. I'm looking forward myself to returning to Fort Worth. I'm one of the resident artists of the Chamber Music Society of Fort Worth, and so I play there a few times a year. So I have a concert there with the artistic director Gary Levinson, who's also one of my best friends, and then some couple other things with my quartet. We have a festival in Miami called New Music Miami, which is based at our university and directed by my dear friend and colleague Orlando Jacinto Garcia, who's the composer in residence at FIU. And we do some really amazing things. And we're actually playing a piano quintet by Pierre Jalbert, who's a really wonderful, well-known composer. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, in May, I guess the summer season starts, and I'm going to figure out how to get from point A to point B at a number of festivals during the summer. I'll be at Heifetz again for 2 weeks, which I'm very, very happy about. Heifetz is, in my opinion, second to none as a festival for young students. and also older students. And then I'm actually going to, prior to Heifetz, I'll be in Montenegro at a festival which has some really terrific European players. And before that, I'll be in Virginia playing with Shmuel in that festival that I mentioned in Virginia Tech, and some other really fantastic players. And yeah, and some stuff with my quartet. And so it'll be busy. Somehow I'll get through it.
Michael, it's been so great to talk with you. It brought back so many great memories, and
I know we have to do this more often.
yes, and I feel like I have a tank full of fuel for thoughts for several practice sessions.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Thank you so much again for being on the show.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Michael Klotz. Visit michaelklotzmusic.com. That's Michael, Klotz, music.com to know more about Michael's career and concert dates. I would love to know what your favorite takeaway from today's show is, so look up Mind Over Finger on Instagram and Facebook and let me know. Also, if you're looking for a group of like-minded individuals, join the Mind Over Finger tribe at facebook.com/groups/mindoverfingertribe for inspiration, motivation, support, and more discussions on how to take your practice to the next level and enjoy the process. As always, you can find the show notes for this episode, resources on mindful and deliberate practice, and more information about Michael at mindoverfinger.com. Also, please do me a favor and head over to iTunes to rate and leave a review. I truly appreciate every single one of them. They make all the hard work worth it, and they help more people find out about the show. Next week, I'll be talking to Northwestern University professor Gerardo Ribeiro, who will give us advice on how to practice mentally and mindfully. A big thank you to my amazing producer, Bella Kelly, and thank you for being here. À bientôt!